There's a particular kind of courage that doesn't get talked about enough in music. It's not the courage of writing a song. It's not even the courage of stepping on stage in front of thousands of people. It's the specific, very particular courage of sitting down behind a drum kit that belonged for nearly 50 years to one of the most beloved and mourned musicians in rock history, knowing that an entire fan base is watching, measuring, and in many cases, openly doubting whether you deserve to be there at all. Geddy Lee has thought about that courage a lot over the past year, and when he talks about Anika Nilles, the German drummer who stepped into Neil Peart's seat for Rush's 2026 reunion tour, there's one phrase he keeps coming back to. She has the guts to sit in that seat. Not she has the talent. Not she has the chops, though she clearly has those too. Guts. Lee chose deliberately to praise something closer to character than skill, because he understood, probably better than anyone alive, exactly what he was asking this woman to walk into. This is the story of how Geddy Lee went from cautious experimenter to Anika Nilles' most outspoken defender, told through his own words across a year of interviews where he kept trying again and again to explain exactly what he was watching happen in front of him. Lee has never pretended the beginning was easy, and that honesty is, in itself, part of why his praise for Nilles carries so much weight. In an interview with The Guardian, Lee admitted that the very first time he and Alex Lifeson started playing alongside Nilles, something simply didn't click. His words were direct. Something felt wrong. Not because she wasn't talented, her talent was never the question. It was because three musicians who hadn't played as a unit in over a decade, two of whom had spent 50 years building a wordless musical language with a third person who was no longer there, were now trying to build an entirely new version of that language from scratch, in real time, under enormous pressure. That kind of friction is normal. It's also incredibly uncomfortable to sit inside, especially for musicians who have spent their entire careers chasing precision. But Lee didn't treat that discomfort as a red flag. He treated it as the honest first step of a process that takes time. And by his own account, it took exactly 5 days for everything to change. By the 5th day of rehearsals, something shifted completely. Nilles' technical facility, the sheer scale of what she was capable of, finally locked into place alongside what Lee and Lifeson were doing. Lee's own description of that moment, blunt and unfiltered, was that she just nailed it. 5 days. That's all it took to go from something felt wrong to a foundation Lee would spend the next year publicly defending. There's a smaller story Lee has told that in some ways captures the whole relationship better than any of the bigger statements. During one rehearsal, after the band had torn through one of Rush's famously complex, constantly shifting arrangements, the kind of song built on time signature changes that would make most professional musicians sweat, Lee turned to Nilles, and without thinking about it, high-fived her. He laughed and told her, "I can't keep up with you." Think about who is saying that sentence. Geddy Lee, a bassist and vocalist who has spent 50 years playing some of the most technically demanding music in rock history, doing things with his hands and his voice simultaneously that most musicians would consider impossible. For him to turn to his new drummer mid-rehearsal and laugh that he couldn't keep up with her is not a small compliment. It's a peer, at the absolute top of his field, being genuinely delighted to be challenged again. He shared another detail, during a rehearsal feature with the New York Times, that was almost bittersweet in how much joy it revealed. Lee admitted that practicing with Nilles had become such a genuine pleasure that he found himself dreading something most musicians would never think twice about: performing live. Specifically, he joked that he'd be a little sad once they hit the stage, because during live shows he'd be facing the audience instead of facing her, and he was having so much fun simply playing alongside her, watching her work, that he didn't want to give up that vantage point. That's not the language of someone tolerating a replacement. That's the language of someone who's rediscovered something joyful about playing music that he maybe thought he'd lost. Of course, none of this happened in a vacuum. From the moment Nilles was announced, a vocal segment of the Rush fan base, protective, passionate, and in many cases grieving Neil Peart in their own way, expressed real skepticism. Could anyone actually do this? Should anyone even try? Geddy Lee did not dodge that conversation. He met it directly, repeatedly, in interview after interview. His clearest, most direct statement on the matter was unambiguous. Anika Nilles was the only drummer Rush seriously considered for this tour. Not a shortlist. Not a series of auditions narrowed down over months. One name, fully committed to, because of everything he and Lifeson had witnessed in that rehearsal room. And when pushed on the skepticism, on the comment sections, the forum threads, the inevitable comparisons, Lee's defense of her was consistent and clear-eyed. He emphasized that what made her right for this role wasn't an ability to perform a flawless imitation of Neil Peart. Rush, he made clear, was never looking for a tribute act. They were looking for someone who could honor the architecture of those songs while bringing something undeniably her own into the room. A fresh story, as he put it, not a carbon copy. That distinction matters enormously because it reframes the entire decision. Lee wasn't asking fans to accept a replacement pretending to be the original. He was asking them to accept an entirely new second chapter, one that respects everything that came before it, without trying to erase the fact that something real and irreversible had happened to this band. And running underneath all of that practical defense was the phrase he kept returning to, the one that wasn't about technique at all. She has the guts to sit in that seat. Lee understood intimately what it costs a person to walk into a role this loaded with grief and expectation. His respect for her wasn't just musical, it was about her willingness to take on a kind of pressure most musicians would simply avoid. Perhaps the most emotionally significant thing Geddy Lee has said throughout this entire process is also the simplest. Lee has never wavered on one point. Neil Peart remains, in his words, absolutely irreplaceable. That is not a sentiment offered as a courtesy. It's something Lee clearly believes down to his bones, and he has never allowed Neil's arrival to be framed as erasing or replacing what Peart meant to this band and to its fans. But alongside that conviction, Lee holds another belief just as firmly, that music has to live beyond tragedy, that the alternative to moving forward isn't some pure untouched preservation of the past, it's silence, an empty stage, a catalog of songs that simply stop being played live, forever, because the grief of continuing feels too complicated to navigate. Speaking with Planet Rock, Lee shared something deeply personal about how he's made peace with that tension. He said he believes Neil Peart would be pleased with their choice of drummer, that Peart would have, in Lee's words, a bit of a smirk on his face, and then, almost as a quiet hope rather than a certainty, he added, "A thumbs up, I hope." There's something profoundly moving about that phrasing. Lee isn't claiming certainty about what his late friend and bandmate would think. He's not putting words in Peart's mouth. He's offering a hope, gentle, humble, clearly carrying real weight, that the man who built this band's rhythmic identity over 5 decades would have recognized something worthy in Anika Nilles' youthful and exciting energy, as Lee described it. Not a replacement of Peart's legacy, but a living continuation of it, a tribute that breathes and plays and surprises people, rather than one frozen in amber. Rush's fan base has always been famously, almost fiercely protective, a community built over decades around a band that rewarded close listening and deep loyalty. Bringing anyone new into that world, let alone into the single most scrutinized role in the band's history, was never going to be simple. But reflecting on Nilles' live debut, Lee expressed something close to relief and genuine gratitude on social media, describing how warmly that notoriously protective Rush family had ultimately welcomed her in. He pointed specifically to her work ethic and her musical background, including her demanding stint touring with Jeff Beck, as the foundation that gave her exactly what she needed, enough technical command and enough respect for the original compositions that she could honor them faithfully while still adding her own unmistakable, powerful stamp on top. Lee has also spoken, with what sounds like genuine delight, about simply watching her grow in real time. He's described how fun it is to watch Anika as she gets to know the songs more deeply. Show after show, not someone who arrived with everything already mastered and frozen, but someone actively, visibly developing a deeper relationship with this music every single night. For a band whose songs are this complex, that kind of ongoing, visible growth is itself a form of respect for the material. I think what's most remarkable about Geddy Lee's year of public statements isn't any single quote, it's the consistency underneath all of them. He never tried to oversell the beginning. He admitted, honestly, that something felt wrong at first. He never tried to diminish what Neil Peart meant or pretend that loss could simply be replaced by talent. And he never stopped defending Anika Nilles, not with hollow positivity, but with specific, considered, repeatedly stated reasons rooted in what he had actually witnessed. A high five he couldn't help himself from giving. A joy he hadn't expected to feel again on a stage. A fifth day where everything simply clicked. She has the guts to sit in that seat. I keep coming back to that sentence because I think it's the truest thing Geddy Lee has said in this entire process. Talent gets people in the door, but the courage to take on something this emotionally loaded, this publicly scrutinized, this impossible to win cleanly no matter how well you play, that's a different kind of quality altogether. Anika Nilles had that, and the man best positioned in the entire world to judge whether she deserved that seat has spent a year telling anyone who would listen that she does. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Neil Peart would approve? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.